Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf mem, number 40, about a third of the way through but Mציעא, as we learn for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanasurim Matzar V'Shivya. Also, today is the yard site of my great-great-great-grandfather, Tefer Shlomo, the first Radomski Rebbe, Erev Chodesh Nisan. So may he, Hashem have an aliyah, may be a schus for all of us. It says the Mishnah, Mafkid Peros Eitzel Chaveiro. A person deposited some kind of grains and fruits, etc., different kinds of grains, different kinds of vegetables with somebody else. And the depositor was not makbid that his stuff would be in a separate box or a separate room, but rather he gave it to the shomer, the person who received it, to the nifgad. He mixed it all up with his stuff. Let's say he gave him rice or wheat. We're going to talk about different kinds of cases. Whatever he mixed it up with his own stuff. You have a bunch of wheat. Okay, just put it in my silo over here, my barn, where I have a lot of other wheat. Okay. So now when it comes to returning it to him, there is some, let's call it I wouldn't call it the depreciation in value, but there's some deterioration, let's say. Some of it, over a period of time, maybe gave it to him at the beginning of the season. And then when he wants to at the high time of the season, when they eat the stuff, when they use it, it's many, many months later, and some of it has deteriorated, disappeared. So what's the amount that the Bailey, the nifgad, can deduct when he gives it back to him? Let's say he gives him a bushel, we would say. Does he have to give him back a whole bushel? Well, some of it just goes bad, right? Some of it goes bad, some of it's eaten by rodents. What do you do? Now, again, it's talking where you don't know exactly how much was eaten up. It wasn't kept separately. And even if the owner knew, as the Gemara is going to say, even if the owner, let's say the farmer, we'll call it, you left him with the farmer, even if the farmer knew how much he had originally his own, so you could say, what's the difference? Again, he constantly takes from his silo for his own use. So he doesn't really know how much he had to deduct to see what's the total amount that should be there. So therefore, you're allowed, when he gives it back to him, he doesn't give him back a whole bushel, he deducts something because there's some deterioration. So he can deduct what's missing. Again, if you gave a farmer, a bushel to hold on to, and he put it in his silo together with all his other bushels, all the stuff was mixed up. Now in the high season, when he wants to eat it, let's say, he comes and he wants to take a bushel, you can deduct something. How much can you deduct? So lechitim los, if it's wheat or rice, tishachat soy kav and lakur. For every kur, a kur is a substantial amount. There are 30 saw in a kur and 6 kav in a saw. So therefore, there's 180 kav in a kur. And it says what he could deduct is 9 halves. That would be 4.5. 4.5 kav for a kur. That works out to 2.5%. You can deduct 2.5%, as we'll see, either because mice eat it, rodents eat the stuff. Some of it could just deteriorate with time, etc., because of the environment, whatever. So that's how much you deduct if it's wheat or rice. And again, these measures were in Eretz Yisrael at that time, and obviously it depends on the location in which you live, the surroundings, the environment in which you kept the stuff. But that was the standard amount. And if it's barley or millet, tisha kav and lakur. That's double the amount. You can deduct 9 kav for every kur. Again, there's 180 kav in a kur. So if you deduct 9, that would be 5%, right? There would be 5% of, that's what you can deduct when you give it back. Lokusman for speltel, lazera pishtin, and for flaxseed or linseed, shlosha saw in the core, 3 whole saw. Again, we said there's 30 saw in a core, which would be, 3 saw would be 18 kav, 3 saw for a core. If there's 3 saw and there's 30 saw in a core, so that would be 10%. Hakol afi amida, it all depends on how much was there, meaning for every core that was there, you can deduct that amount. Hakol afi isman, it depends how long it was there. But obviously, there's a difference if you kept it there for 1 year, for 2 years, or for 3 years. So for every year and for every core, that's what you deduct. Rabbi Yochanan Nuri, so I understand. Rabbi Yochanan Nuri understood that the whole deterioration came about because of the mice. So he says, if you have a whole group of mice, how much can they eat? What's the difference to the mice if there's 1 core or 100 core? They can only eat so much. They're not like human beings who overeat. You put sholem and kishka in front of them, they'll eat until they get sick. But the animals usually just eat till they're filled. They're not worried about their next meal. So and what do the mice care how much is there? Whether they eat their fill, whether there was a lot or a little. You should know. You only can deduct on one core. But if the guy gave the farmer 100 core to watch, only from the first core can you deduct this. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, if there was a very large amount, we'll see like 10 core, a large amount, you don't deduct anything, because they expand. Because when they give them in the dry season, when they're harvested, it's dry. When they give them back after the winter, because of the humidity in the air, etc., the rain, all that, they expand. So even when you give them back the same amount that you gave you've already deducted it because the items themselves expand. We'll see there's another pshat in Mosiros that based on the measure, Gemara will explain all this. Says Gemara, why do you say that if a case of rice, only 2.5% gets deteriorated, right? And as it gets smaller, right? It gets smaller by 2.5%, the same amount that you were given. Now shrinks, let's say, by 2.5%. Or it should shrink more. We're talking about what we call shelled rice or peeled rice. When it's peeled, and as when we say it shrinks more, that's if it's unsealed, if it's unshelled, meaning they're still in their covers or unpeeled. We call this like a peel of a rice. If it's unpeeled, then with the peels, that also deteriorates, that shrinks. So then the deduction is more, but if they're already peeled, it only shrinks by 2.5%. So he said for spelt and for flaxseed, you do 10%. We're talking about zerapishin in their shells, in their stalks. That's why that percentage is higher, is 10%. We're talking about that in their shells. And if the rice was not peeled, still in their shells or their covers, it would be 3 saw for a core, which would be 10%, not 20%. Of the first core, according to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan's the first core, but as we'll see, because he said, listen, how much can mice eat? It's mice. So we'll see. There's enough for opinions. We're going to get to that in a minute. Why isn't he right? It makes sense what he says. We'll see. What does it mean? Tana kain l'chol core for every core. The Tana Kama doesn't agree with Rabbi Yochanan. He says for every core you can deduct the 2.5%, 5%, 10%, depending on what the item was. For each and every year you deduct. So Rabbi Yochanan says, what do you mean? The mice can only eat so much. What's the difference to them if there's 1 core or 100 core? Tanya Amalol, Rabbi Yochanan, we didn't mention anything about mice. Harbe ovdos. There are other destructive items over here. There's other things that cause them loss, man. A lot of it's scattered. In other words, some of it just gets deteriorated because it goes bad. It spoils. There's other reasons why it can go bad. Rashi says here, no, there's no Rashi on this one. Yeah. Rashi doesn't say there's no Rashi on this one, but he says there's other causes for loss. Other causes for loss. Some Mefarshim say that when mice see a large amount, they call their friends. That's not. They bring their right. That's real. They bring their friends along. There's like you get calls. Yeah, they call their friends. So that's another reason. So Rebbe says, listen, how much can the mice eat? Yeah, but they bring their friends. Or a lot of it gets scattered. A lot of it just deteriorates. A lot of it gets rotten. So that's why you have these percentages. Now, why is this speaking about? If you gave me something to watch, I would put it in a drawer or put it in a box or a room and close the door, and that would be it. Whatever's there is there. So he explains now. That's if you mix it with your own peros. The farmer said, "Oh, you want me to keep some bushels for you or some core? Throw it in the silo with my stuff." But if he specified for him and he set aside for him a special corner, meaning a special area. Listen, this always you had your own storage locker. You put everything in your own storage locker. Whatever's there is there. Don't come to me. Whatever's lost is lost. You put it in there. What do you want from me? Wait a minute. So what if I mix it with my Paris? Left side of the day come in. Let's see how much I had before. right? Let's say I know how much I had before, so the remainder should be yours. No, I'm a mistopic man. I've been using it all along. I've been using my own. Mistopic to see how much he did. In other words, I said, listen, you want to put your stuff there, throw it in with mine. And then, okay, you gave me 20 bushels. Okay, I know it's 20 bushels. And I keep taking from mine. So how much is yours? How much of yours is left? We don't really know because it's all mixed up. So then we say it depends on what the kind of item that it is and the amount of time that it was, 2.5%, 5%, 10%, whatever the deduction would be. Rabbi Yehuda said, listen, Rabbi Yehuda said that if there was a lot there in you don't deduct anything because the volume is made up. Now, how does that work? Rabbi Yehuda says, first of all, what does he mean by a large amount? 10 core. 10 core is an awful lot. That's like 1,800 kav. That's a substantial amount. Then you don't deduct anything. 10 core and Tana we're at the end of the first line of the wide lines. Like this. This is only speaking about when. When do we say that Rabbi Yehuda says that if there was a large amount, you don't make any deduction? That's when he measured them out. There's different kinds of, let's say we call it bushels or whatever. When he measures out from the granary, they use a larger measure. A bushel is larger. When he returns it, a bushel is smaller. So he said, when the depositor measured out from bushels from his own granary, gorno. Now, is this that we say that you have to make these deductions is if they, if he measured it out from the goram, where you use a certain size of bushel measure, and he returned it that way. Then you say you make these deductions 2.5%, 5%, 10%. But let's say he measured it out from the granary, the bushel, the larger bushel measure. So in the house, they measure bushels at a smaller rate. Then there's no reason to make any deduction. Because the granary bushel is a larger measure anyway. So when do we say you make this deduction? When the guy says, listen, okay, I gave you 10 granary bushels. Give me back 10 granary bushels. Give it back to you. I'm going to deduct 2.5 or 5 or 10%, whatever the amount is. But if he measured them back with housing bushels, where the bushels are smaller, then you've already given him less. So you don't have to deduct anything because the granary bushels are larger, right? Rashi says, Midas Agor, and I see Yisera al Shabbatim. Says Gemara, Armalei B'chiv B'shifnis here. We talking about idiots over here. The Yava B'chayla Rabbi gives them in a large measure. B'shaka B'chayla Zuta. I give you a large measure. I give it to you in a large bushel, and you give me back small bushels. I mean, we're not talking about idiots. So the measure should be the same. So maybe this is what you meant. Maybe you didn't mean granary measures as opposed to housing measures. Nobody would use different measures for giving him back and forth. It's like saying, I'm depositing $100 at the bank and they're giving me back $50. What does that mean? It doesn't make sense to say you're giving back at a smaller measure. Maybe it means this. Maybe it means if the deposit was made in the time of the Goren, when the granary, when they've just done the harvest and the all the tzfua, the produce is dry. So then, if he measured it out at the time of the Goren when things were dry, and he gave it back to him when things were dry. But if he measured when things were dry, and he returned it to him when things were wet in the wintertime, when there's rain and there's great humidity, then they spent and he doesn't have to deduct any loss. Because they expand, because the produce expands. That's really how it is. The cement sidewalk expands, right? At those times. So certainly the grains also expand because they absorb the humidity in the air, and certainly if they get rained upon. So then, because of the cold. So then you don't make any deduction at all. All this was obviously at that time in Eretz Yisrael, depending on the circumstances and depending on the items. Also, obviously, a normal person today, if I stored something for you, I'd keep it in a separate container, so there wouldn't be any issue. This is all speaking about where I mixed up your stuff with my stuff, and I'm using my stuff, and I don't know how much to give you back. Okay, you gave me so many core, fine, I'll deduct 2.5, 10, 5, or 10%, whatever the number is. But if he says, if you gave it to me in the dry season, I'm returning it in the wet season, and this is a volume measure, so since it expands, I'm going to give you the same amount that already includes the loss. If they expand, then if they were in a barrel or a large jug or a pitcher, it should burst, right? If you put these things if you put these grains in a pitcher and it expanded in the winter, the pitcher should burst. How about you have the pucker time? Sometimes they did break. They did burst open. There was a story taka. Sometimes it burst open. Sometimes if you pack them into a pitcher, yes, normally they expand if you leave them loose. But if you if you put them in a pitcher and there's no room to expand, then they pressure one another. And because of the pressure, they're pushed to one another and they don't expand. But normally they expand. Now, that's when we're talking about grains and spelt and things like that. What about if you're talking about a liquid measure like wine or oil? So the Mishnah goes on, Yotzi lo shtus liyayin. The wine, you can deduct 1/6 because what happens to the wine? Well, today we know that it evaporates, right? But there, even without evaporation, we'll see that it gets absorbed in the barrel itself, in the earthenware barrel, and some of it turns, the sediment sinks down too. So you can deduct if he gives you wine and you're giving him back wine over a period of time, you can deduct 1/6. Rav Yehuda Chomesh, you could deduct even not a 6, which is like 16 and change percent, but 20%. Why? We'll see, because Rav Yehuda's time in Yehuda's barrels, the barrels that he had in his town absorb more. 3 log of shemen, if it's wine. If it's oil doesn't get as absorbed into the barrel as much as wine. So you deduct 3%, 3 log for every 100. Right? Logo machzashmar. Why 3? 1.5 for sediment that settles to the bottom. Logo machzabelen, 1.5 for absorption into the barrels. Let's say it was pure refined oil. So it was already, there's no sediments going to arise. Then he doesn't deduct for the sediment because it's already been refined as pure. However, you still deduct the 1.5% for the absorption. Also, let's say the barrels were old, meaning they had already absorbed all they can absorb and they were strong. And then you don't deduct for the absorption either. So if it was refined oil and it was old jugs, then you don't deduct anything. Rav Yehuda, not only in the case, so Rav Yehuda adds on a new thing. Here we're talking about if I deposit something with you, what do you have to give me back? Rav Yehuda, if I sell you pure oil, like they have today, virgin oil, extra virgin oil, right? There's various levels according to the Bureau of Measures and Standards, what we call here. They have rules for that. What's considered the pure? It comes from certain areas of Italy and all that. You got to really make it very pure.
First press, second press.
Yeah. So they have all kinds of rules about that. So even if you sell them pure oil, if I sell them pure oil, the purchaser has to accept a deduction. In other words, even if I sell you pure oil, I can deduct 1.5% from the amount that I give you for the sediment. I'm not giving you sediment. I'm giving you pure, but you have to accept it upon yourself that the loss of the shmarm that the seller has to absorb. Rashi says over here, take a look at Rashi before the lines go. Who mazukak is pure. In other words, the sediment has gone to the bottom. The seller has bought big barrels, right? And in the barrels of oil, there's sediment. And when he sells it off and he takes from the top, the pure stuff, he's not giving the purchaser any sediment. So he has to accept because of that, even though he's not getting any, he's not giving him sediment. The Gemara is going to talk about that. The Gemara says in the Tanakama, when it comes to the wine, the Tanakama said you can deduct a 6. Rav Yehuda said a fifth, 20%. Mark said really no machlokas about this in halacha. The question is, what was the real facts in each town? Each one goes according to town. Ba'asri demar chafu b'kira. In the Tanakama's town, they lined the earthenware barrels with wax. It didn't absorb as much. Basri Damar in Rabbi Yehuda's town, they lined it with pitch, with tar, and absorbed more. So since it absorbed more, you can deduct when you're giving it back the oil, the wine. He gave you wine, you stored it in your earthenware vessels, right? And in Rabbi Yehuda's town, the earthenware vessels absorb more. So when he gives them back the wine itself, the liquid itself, he can deduct 20%. Ibai Sema Mishum Gargisha also could have been not only because of what the jugs, the barrels were lined with, but rather the jugs themselves. They had different kinds of clay because it's made from earth, right? Mishum Gargishta. How might it fay? In other words, Rabbi Yehuda's town, the earthenware barrels were absorbed more because of the kind of clay that they had there. Rabbi Yehuda's town, it absorbed more. In the Tanakhama's town, it absorbed less. Basar Rabbi Yehuda. Now he goes on to explain the following. This is like a new thing. Basar Rabbi Yehuda in Rabbi Yehuda's town, Ramu Arbam V'Timne Kuze Bedana. They were in his town 48 jugs of, let's say, oil could go into a barrel in Dana. Azol Dana B'Shisa Zuze, and every barrel went for 6 zuz. Everyone went for 6 zuz. Okay. Now, Paras Rabbi Yehuda himself went into business, and Shisa B'Zuzah. Okay, he himself sold them. He retailed them 6 jugs for a zuz. Okay, so what happened was here, Russell, in other words, the whole barrel was sold for 6 zuz, and he sold 6 jugs. There were 48 jugs, 48 cups, you can call that. 48, I think it's easier to use the word cups. 48 cups went into a barrel, right? And the whole barrel was sold for 6 zuz, right? Now he retailed them for 6, what I call them, 6 cups, 6 cups for a zuz. Okay, so when he sold 36 cups, right? When he sold 36 cups, he'd make his money back, right? 36 cups went for the 6 zuz. Okay, Dal plus Mashisa. So we'll knock those 36 out. At that point, he's break even, right? He sold 6 times 6 cups, every one for a zuz. He got his 6 zuz back now. Now, Dal Klausen, Beshisa, right? That was sold for those 6 zuz. Pashla Trace, and now there's 12 left, right? That's his profit. But Dal Timne Shtusa, Dal Timne Shtusi. Now he loses 8 more. Why? Because of a 6th. A 6th gets absorbed, right? We just explained. We're using this to explain the story. We said that when the wine gets absorbed, right? The wine gets absorbed. Let's say we're talking about wine here. I mentioned oil, but it's really wine. We're talking about wine over here. We said a 6th of it gets absorbed, right? So a 6th of 48 is how much? 8. So he lost 8 because of absorption. He made his money back when he sold 6 times 6 cups for a zuz each. So when he sold 36, he got his 6 zuz back, but he lost 8 because of absorption. How much is left? 4. So all he's left is Pashal Arba. That was his profit, was the 4 cups. When it comes to necessities, requirements, not the extra clothing or fancy cars or whatever it was, when it comes to basic needs like foods, vegetables, things like that, you're allowed to earn a profit of a 6, but not more than a 6, but a 6 you can earn. Here he didn't even earn a 6. He didn't even earn a 6. How much did he earn? 4 out of 48, which would be a 12th. The 12th, that's all he was up. You should be able to more. But Ika Gulfi Vishama, yeah, but he gains this. He gets the barrels. He bought the whole barrel for 6, right? So he gains the barrel itself, Vishamri, and the sediment, which he could also sell off at a cheaper rate. So he gains that. If that's the case, he made more than a 6. There's also his labor, and the money. Either this is, I says two pshat and Rashi. One is for the marketer, the guy to market and say, "Hey, come and buy it here." You got to pay him. You know, pay a worker, or Bazanaisa, the guy who made the bung. It was a specialty thing to make the cork that goes into the barrel, without breaking the whole thing, so that it works. So he had some expenses there too. So it works out to a 6. So we said the Tanakama held that if it was pure oil, you don't deduct anything for the sediment. But it's got to absorb something, right? You say over here that if it was wine, if it was pure, you don't deduct for the sediment, and if it was old barrels, it doesn't, you don't have to deduct anything for absorption. But isn't it possible it's got to absorb something? No, it's speaking about where they were lined with tar, and it doesn't show that it was lined with tar, and therefore it didn't absorb. Even if it wasn't lined with tar, even the tone. Once it had absorbed everything, it was already laden with whatever it could absorb. And it's like barrels of liquid. Once they've absorbed something, they can't absorb anymore because the wood or whatever, in this case, the earthenware, is satiated with whatever it could take, so it couldn't take any more. So here the Mishnah was talking about, we're talking about oil. If it was already absorbed as much as it could, that's all you could do. Then we had a machlokas. Pardon? Treated barrels, right? Or treated not on purpose, but they were treated. Yeah, they effectively were full. Then we had a machlokas between the Tanakama and Rav Yehuda added on. These rules not only apply when somebody deposited something with you, but even when something was sold, right? Even when something was sold as well. So in the story with Rav Yehuda, not Rav Yehuda in the Mishnah, Rav Yehuda was an Amora, not a Tana. But in the story, in the Rav Yehuda, we're talking about wine, and that apparently the wine was absorbent, etc. But here we talk about if it was pure oil. If it was pure oil, what's the rule? So we said if it was pure oil and doesn't absorb anything, then fine, then you don't deduct anything. In the case of Rav Yehuda with the story there was talking about wine that had that was absorbed into the barrels. Even if it was lined, apparently the wine gets absorbed a lot easier than the oil. Because in the oil, we said if it was pure oil or if it was old barrels, they don't absorb anything. Either they were lined with pitch or they were just old. So apparently and we see the oil is a lot less absorbent than wine. Wine gets absorbed a lot easier, and that's why the amounts are different. So and as a person, if you sell a pure oil, the purchaser has to accept a 1.5% loss. In other words, if you ask him for a liter, he gets a liter less 1.5% because of the sediment. Whereas the Tanakhama says no, that is mochel. He's the part of the sediment. The owner has to be mochel that, and he gives him pure stuff. So Abai says, if you really want to understand if you really want to understand the machlokes Rav Yehuda and the Rabbanan, according to Rav Yehuda, you're allowed, the owner, the seller is allowed to mix some of the lees in there and put some in there. You can't do that. It's usher. In other words, if it happens naturally, it's one thing, but you can't actually put it in. You're allowed to. Behind the time of the makabel, that's why the purchaser has to accept upon himself the 1.5% loss because of the shmarim. The Amrli could say, the seller could say, listen, I could have mixed it up. You want pure oil, right? You want pure oil, but I'm allowed to mix it up. Contribute, he's allowed to. I could have done that. If I wanted to mix it up, couldn't I have done that? Hashanami, even though I didn't mix it up, okay, I'm giving you pure, but you have to take a 1.5% less because I could have mixed it up. Let him tell him, what are you talking about? How can you say, had you mixed it up, then I could have sold it that way too. Whatever you give me, I sell that way together with the sediment. Now what do you want me to do? Accept 1.5% of this? What are you going to give me? 1.5% of sediment by itself? I can't sell it. So why can't the purchaser say, listen, had you mixed it up, fine. Let's say you're allowed to mix it up. But had you mixed it up, fine. I would have bought it mixed up and I would have sold it that way. But now that you gave me pure stuff and you want to give me the sediment separately, I can't sell the sediment separately. The answer to Bavai is, we're not talking about a seller. We're not talking about that the purchaser was going to go retail it elsewhere. We're talking about the Bavai himself and wanted it pure, therefore that wouldn't be. But still, he wants pure, clear oil, and therefore he can't have an excuse like that. But let him tell him, middle obviously achulachli. So let him say, well, you could have mixed it up, but since you didn't, you were mochel. Rabbi Yehuda says less mechili. He says you're not mochel. You don't renounce. You don't automatically forgive the stuff that's on. Where do we find this? Mochelos etzemen. If a farmer sells a yoke of oxen to somebody, a yoke, he sells him a yoke. I'm selling you a yoke. Now a yoke could mean with the 2 oxen underneath it. The yoke itself is worth a lot less than the oxen. This is the Tanakh says if you sold him the yoke, you didn't sell him the cows. Machlo a buck if you sold him the cows. Lo machlos etzemen. You got to be specific. If you don't know. Hadam modian, you could tell by the amount of money. Okay, so says to sell me a yoke for 200 zuz. The yoke itself, the wood itself, and the abizarim, these appliances are not worth 200 zuz. So it's clear that he was mochel. Ain't adam right? He can't say. So why? Because the chum could say, yeah, he's mochel. Sometimes the guy is mochel. Wanted 200, okay, I sell you 200 for that. You're mochel at the rest. I mean, when I say I'm selling you this for 200, I meant literally the yoke. You're overpaying. So that's how things work sometimes. You're mochel the extra one. You're willing to pay more. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, people aren't mochel. Therefore, you can't tell them, since you didn't give me, back in our case with the oil, you can't say, since you didn't put the sediment in there, you were mochel me. You weren't mochel me. Rabbi Yehuda says you can deduct for this sediment, even though he's not giving him sediment. He's not giving him sediment. He's just giving him pure oil, but he's saying you still have to deduct 100% because I could have mixed up the sediment in there. That's the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim say also option. You can't mix up. You can't put sediment in there. Behind the time, that's why he wouldn't accept it. The Amalei, boys Laruve, had you wanted to mix it up, you wouldn't have been allowed to. Hashnam Lakildas. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says in our Mishnah that therefore, if you sell shemen, pure shemen, you're allowed to tell the guy, I'm deducting 1.5% for the sediment that I'm not giving you, but I'm allowed to mix it up. Whereas the Chum say, no, you're not allowed to mix it up. Therefore, he doesn't have to accept any loss at all. If I'm paying for a liter of oil, I want pure oil. According to Chum, we pass like the Chachamim. Let's say the verse, it's more mustafa. I'll tell you the opposite. It's more mustafa to say the opposite in the Shitas. You're allowed to mix up the shmarim. The reason why the purchaser doesn't have to accept the loss, obviously, since you didn't mix it up, you're mochel. That's why you're allowed to, but you didn't, so you're mochel. And therefore, I don't have to accept any less than, I don't have to deduct 1.5% from the purchase. The Rabbi Yehuda also allowed shmarim. You're not allowed to. Behind the time of the makabel, that's why he accepts the loss. To Amrlei, he could say, "E boy la ruvei lo sharlecha." Had you wanted to mix it up, you're not allowed to. E boy la ruvei lo sharile. Right? Had I wanted to mix it up, I wouldn't have been able to. So kabuli lo kakalta, you won't accept the loss. Zovan, if you buy the zovan and you sell tagrik, you're called a merchant. In other words, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not allowed to mix it up. So he's the reason why he tells the purchaser that you have to accept 100%. I can't put any sediment in there. I can't mix it up. So what do you want me to do? Sell it to you and I should accept the loss of the sediment. I should eat that. If I eat that, I'm basically buying and selling at the same price. The old line that you say, if I sell it to you for this, I'm losing money, right? You can't sell it for you. It costs me more than that, right? You know the line. So that's the famous line in the Gemara. If you buy and sell for the same price, that's a merchant. A merchant has to buy at a lower price and sell at a higher price. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not allowed to. I can't mix it up. So what do you want me to do? If you don't want to accept the loss of the 1.5%, I won't make anything over here. Therefore, you have to accept the loss. But in any case, the halachas, the chacham say the purchaser does not have to accept the loss of the sediment, and Rabbi Yehuda says he does that. Tana. Both lekech and mafkid are the same when it comes to the scum. That's the seeds and stuff that float to the top of the barrel. It says just like the lekech does not have to accept the scum at the top. Mafkid the mafkid, the depositor, also doesn't have to the scum. What do you want? It's your scum. It's your oil, right? What do you want from me? Of course, it's your stuff. What do you want from me? Of course, it's your stuff. Just like the depositor has to accept the scum because it's his oil. Also has to accept the salas. Does it mean he have to accept it? When we say the turbid, the muddy oil is only on the mocher side. So Shmarm. Lokech already accepted, according to Rabbi Yehuda at least, he already accepted, or even according to Chachamim, if it was a depositor. We're not talking about a sale over the Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanim was by a sale, but not by a depositor. By a depositor, he has to accept 1.5% Shmarm. So since he accepts there, therefore the mocher, he does use the word mocher. He says, Ela mocher bavad. Right? Only a seller has to accept that. Because lokech mekabel b'machzeh shmarm. Maybe it's going according to Rabbi Yehuda. He already accepts 1.5% for the seed, for the leaves, for the sediment, below pkatim, without the scum. So what do you see over here? How can you say that the mekabel has to accept it? We already know Rabbi Yehuda says that the mocher has to accept the loss for the scum because the purchaser already accepted 1.5 for the sediment. So kasha. When they deposit it in Tishrei after the harvest. And then he wants it back in Nisan. at the time when they want to use it, let's say for Pesach or whatever, for Yontif, Kimida de Tishrei, according to the measure of Tishrei, according to the price and measure of Tishrei, then the purchaser has to accept the bad stuff too. But if he pays for it in Nisan at the higher price, all right, Kimida de Nisan, then he accepts it at the price of Nisan. Rashi says over here, Kimida de Tishrei, Keshara Domim, Kimida does not mean the measure, means the price. Keshara Domim Shel Tishrei, Shu Bezol, the Stam Shemona Machurim, Bekibel Kotim, as if when the buyer buys it in Tishrei and he's accepting it in Tishrei at the lower price, then he accepts not only the loss of the sediment but also the loss of the scum. He's got to absorb that. But if he bought it he deposited in Tishrei and he's giving it to him in Nisan at the higher price, when the stuff is pure already, then the purchaser does not accept upon himself the price of the scum. He wants it pure. Rashi says here, the last Rashi before the Mishnah, the higher price. In Nisan, they've already been purified, they've already been refined. He sells only refined oil. Again, according to Rav, he can still deduct 1.5% for sediment. According to Rabbanan, he can't. But the question is about the scum. If he's buying it according to the price of Tishrei, he accepts the scum. If he buys it according to the price in Nisan, then the purchaser does not accept the scum. All right, we'll pick it up here from the Mishnah tomorrow. Tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh, so tomorrow we start the opening at 6 o'clock. Learn from the Mishnah tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem. Have a good day, everybody. Hold it.
101.